If you're in the process of learning Japanese or you're interested in learning Japanese in the future, you have probably seen some statements like this. Students with prior kanji knowledge require 1,700 to 2,600 hours of study for N1 JLPT, while other students require 3,000 to 4,800 hours. Or basically just people saying those with Chinese knowledge has significant advantage over people who don't. Is that really true? Well, yes, I think that much is undeniable. But have you ever wondered what it actually means when people say that? What kind of advantage do they actually have? Today, I want to dive deep into this concept and really talk about it. 3 disclaimers. 1. This video is coming from the perspective of a Japanese learner, not a teacher. I am by no means an expert in Japanese. I am just sharing my experience as someone who knows Chinese, embarking upon Japanese studies. If there's any inaccuracies in my assessment, or if there's anything you would like to add on, feel free to let me know in the comments below. 2. I know that Korean-speaking individuals will also have this advantage to some extent as well. However, I have zero Korean knowledge and experience, so I will be only approaching this from the perspective of someone who knows Chinese. 3. This video is coming from the perspective of someone who has knowledge of Standard Mandarin. Of course, there are many different Chinese dialects out there depending on geographical locations, but I won't be going too much detail into that. I will only be talking about the version of Chinese most known to all international viewers. It's pretty much common knowledge to everyone in the Japanese learning sphere that there are essentially 3 writing systems in Japanese. We have the hiragana, which forms the essential backbone of the entire language. We have katakana, which is usually used for loanwords, special names, emphasis, or some other stylistic effects. And we have, most importantly, kanji, which are essentially Chinese characters. Kanjis are important in making reading easier, not least because it helps distinguish words from each other. This is essentially one of the biggest cures to written ambiguities caused by homonyms, which are different words with the same spelling. One simple example is the word sensei, which can mean teacher, oath, or preemption depending on how it's presented. From the perspective of a Chinese-speaking person, hiragana and katakana are completely incomprehensible without any additional studies. If you were to ask a Chinese-speaking individual with zero Japanese knowledge to read a word with just hiragana or katakana in it, they will not be able to process it in any capacity. On that note, a Chinese-speaking beginner will also need to go through the learning arc for hiragana and katakana, the same way any other beginner needs to. Now, the so-called Chinese knowledge advantage comes strictly from kanji comprehension. However, just because it only impacts 1/3 of Japanese writing system does not mean it is something to be underestimated. The advantage they obtain is tremendous, to put it simply. To truly understand what the advantage entails, I propose we discuss this from 3 different perspectives. 1. Meaning association, 2. Reading, and 3. Compound words. One of the strongest points of someone with a Chinese background is their ability to associate meanings to the kanji characters. This is extremely important, and they have reached a level where they can do so by intuition. Let me give you an example. This is the Japanese adjective samui, which means cold, usually referring to the weather or temperature. This is the Chinese word hanlong, which means chilly, cold. This is the Chinese word naihan, which means cold resistant. And this is the Chinese word pinhan, which means poor, impoverished. You can probably see where I'm going with this. A Chinese speaker will be able to just see the parallel, associate the Japanese adjective samui with the concept of coldness, just because the kanji itself has the inherent meaning of coldness attached to it. Even when the association is not very clear-cut or direct, a Chinese speaker can also use symbolic meanings to draw associations as well. Someone who only knows the word pinhan will still be able to picture someone poor suffering in a place without warmth or clothing. That can allow them to essentially guess the meanings of kanji without even knowing how they are pronounced. For someone with no kanji knowledge, this form of association practice is essentially impossible. When they come across the word samui, their thought process is limited to one thing. Oh great, a new kanji to learn. Let me look at how it's pronounced and what it means. This puts them in a direct disadvantage in comparison, because one of the ways for them to develop meaningful connections in their memory is curtailed by having no existing frame of reference. What I'm about to say is a gross oversimplification of how Japanese pronunciations and readings actually work. They do not fully explain the intricacies as well as touch on the history behind them. But I think for the purposes of such a simple video, it should suffice. Usually, each kanji has two kinds of reading, a kunyomi reading and an onyomi reading. Now, this does not mean that a kanji only has two ways to be read. A kanji can have multiple kunyomi readings and multiple onyomi readings at the same time as well. A kunyomi reading is simply put, the Japanese way for a kanji to be pronounced, whereas the onyomi reading reflects the Chinese way of pronouncing the words. Let's get some examples on the table to illustrate this clearer. There is this kanji as shown on the screen here. The kunyomi reading for this kanji is yama, which means mountain. Now, this word in Chinese is pronounced as shan, which also means mountain. One of the onyomi readings for this kanji is, well, san, reflecting the pronunciation used in Chinese. Let's reuse our earlier example as well. This is samui, and the kunyomi reading for this kanji is samu. We already know this word. In Chinese, is pronounced han, as in hanleng, naihan, or pinhan, as discussed earlier. With that said, it should not come as a surprise that the onyomi reading for this kanji turns out to be kan, as in kanpu, cold wind. This reflection of Chinese pronunciation means Chinese-speaking learners can find themselves associating words with pronunciations they are familiar with as well. This is actually how I, as someone who knows Chinese, learned my kanji as well. There are many times when I'm completely lost as to how a word is to be pronounced, and I guess it's simply based on my Chinese knowledge. It can be detrimental or advantageous depending on how reliant you are. Here's a clip of me getting my readings right simply from guessing onyomi and nothing else. Jimon jita. Jimon jito. Jimon jito. Jimon jito. So, this gives Chinese-speaking learners another edge. Not only can Chinese-speaking learners derive meaning from the word itself, they can also guess the onyomi reading easier as well. Even if the pronunciations are not 100% accurate to the Chinese counterpart, and even if the inflections are different as well, the fact that Chinese-speaking learners have another form of reference means they can pick up onyomi readings faster. A Chinese-speaking learner just needs to modify them a little bit from what they're already used to, whereas someone with no Chinese knowledge will essentially have to memorize an additional set of onyomi readings on top of the kunyomi readings for each kanji. This is a follow-up to the 2 points I've just talked about, and you will see their applications in a bit. You are already familiar with the concept of compound words. I mean, we use them in English too. Butter and fly gets you butterfly, rain and bow gets you rainbow, so on and so forth. While in English, compound words are usually more commonly seen in the form of mostly nouns and verbs, such as brainstorm, proofread, ponytail, etc. In Chinese, and by extension in Japanese, they are used to represent a lot of everyday concepts that are arguably even wider in scope and application than in English. An example we've already seen is kanpu, which is the kanji for cold and the kanji for wind, giving you cold wind. It goes way beyond that though, as there are compound words that give you abstract concepts too. Let's look at a Chinese example before we look at them from a Japanese perspective. This is the Chinese word 公平, with 公 being seen in words like 公开, open to the public, 公务, public affairs. So you get the idea that this word has something inherently to do with publicity. This word, 平, comes from words like 水平, water level, 平均, average, or just 平 by itself, which means flat. And this gives you an idea of some form of statistical standard or a physical level. Combining these two concepts, you get the concept of fairness, impartiality, 公平, that is to say, no matter which end of the public you come from, the same flat level of treatment will be given to you. This is a Chinese word used almost daily, so it's a very applicable word for Chinese-speaking learners. So now that we know this Chinese word 公平 means fairness and impartiality, let's look at what it means in Japanese. Oh wow, this kanji means, you guessed it, fairness, impartiality. There are many situations where the meanings of compound word will be directly transferred from Chinese to Japanese. Of course, this is not a foolproof way to learn Japanese. There are situations where compound words do not reflect 100% properly. This word, in Japanese, is read as jobu, meaning healthy, strong, robust, whereas in Chinese, it's 丈夫, meaning husband. However, from what I've seen so far in my studies, these situations where the Japanese meanings do not reflect Chinese meanings usually are more of an exception rather than a status quo. So now we know Chinese compound words can have their meanings transferred almost directly to their Japanese equivalents as well. Let's look at this from a pronunciation perspective. Well, Chinese-speaking learners will find pleasure in finding out that many, emphasis many, not all, compound words use onyomi readings. This is the reason why the word for impartiality or fairness, 公平, is read 公平 in Japanese as well. Let's do a little bit of an imagination exercise together, okay? Imagine there's a contest taking place at the moment, and 3 random pedestrians are chosen to be contestants. The contest is who can most accurately decipher the sentences. Points will be awarded by a judge based on how close it is to the full meaning of the sentence. We have Mr. Lee, an average Chinese businessman with absolutely zero Japanese knowledge. We have James, who only knows English, not Chinese or Japanese. And then we have Miki, a kindergartner who only has exposure to hiragana knowledge and has never read a single kanji in her life. Now, obviously there will be a language barrier between all of the contestants and the judge. Fortunately, the judge is not only a polyglot, but he has mind-reading abilities as well, so the language barrier is not a problem. The judge gives the first sentence, which is this. It means, I do not like cats. The judge then reads each of the contestants' minds to see what they are thinking. First, James, who has absolutely no Chinese or Japanese knowledge, draws a blank. He simply cannot begin to process the sentence, and hence he gets 0 points for this round. The judge then reads Miki's mind. Miki does not know how to read this kanji and this kanji, but she does know how to read the hiragana, ga, and then the janai at the back. She doesn't really understand what the subjects or objects are, but she reads janai and interprets it as not. So whatever the subject is doing, it's probably something to be negated. The judge is so impressed with her thought process and awards her a quarter points for trying. Next, the judge looks at Mr. Lee. The judge finds that Mr. Lee does not know how to read the hiragana, but he can make out some context from the kanji that is in the sentence. Mr. Lee knows that this word, in Chinese, is read mao, which means cat. Mr. Lee also knows this word, in Chinese, which is read hao, meaning good. It's also seen in words like 爱好, hobby, or 喜好, preferences. So he furnishes a guess. It has something to do with likability, and it involves a cat. Maybe the sentence is, I like cats? The judge, being impressed with his thought process, gives him half a point for trying. Now, let's pause for a moment here and look at what is happening. Did Mr. Lee get the sentence right? Well, no. In fact, he got the opposite of what the sentence is trying to say. But I want you to compare specifically the thought processes between James and Mr. Lee. From James's perspective, the sentence could have been anything. It could have been, I saw a UFO this morning. It could have been, I ate pancakes for lunch. It could have been, remember to like and subscribe. Compared to James, Mr. Lee's ability to reduce the billions and billions of possibilities into a sentence that 1. Involves cats, and 2. Involves likability is the raw display of the so-called Chinese knowledge advantage. Astonishing does not even begin to describe the difference between these two. That is what it truly means when people say Chinese-speaking learners have the advantage. Here comes round 2 of the contest. The judge gives the same exact sentence, but this time, it consists only of hiragana. There is no kanji involved. Unsurprisingly, once again, James finds himself unable to answer at all. However, James is surprised to find out that this time, Mr. Lee got 0 points as well. From Mr. Lee's perspective, there are no Chinese characters to carry him through the sentence. He cannot begin to process what the sentence is trying to say at all. On the other hand, Miki reads the whole sentence in hiragana, figures out that it means I do not like cats, and pictures that in her head. The judge awards Miki a full point, making her the winner of this contest. Now, of course, Miki will continue on to learn and improve on her Japanese reading the same way any other Japanese citizen would. Instead, I want to focus more on James and Mr. Lee. Hypothetically speaking, if they decide to study Japanese from now on, what will happen? Let's compare the pathways for learning Japanese between these two individuals. They will start with hiragana and katakana as usual. But once kanjis get involved, their paths will diverge dramatically. Let's assume you are someone with no Chinese knowledge. If you have learned Japanese, or if you plan on learning Japanese, I can guarantee 100% certain, for sure, that you have gone through or you will go through a 3-step process I'm about to describe. For each kanji you come across, regardless of whether it's a kunyomi reading or an onyomi reading or whatever, you will do these 3 steps. Number 1, associate a reading with the meaning. To give you an example, this is where you associate the reading samui with the meaning cold. Number 2, you will associate a kanji with the reading. This is where you associate this specific term with the reading samui. Number 3, associate a kanji with the meaning. This is where you associate this term with the meaning cold. Now, you could do such an association using furigana or using romaji English letters or whatever you want to call it. The meanings can be more or less precise depending on the context. You can do it in whatever order you want. You can do it subconsciously or intentionally, but my point still doesn't change. You will inevitably do this 3-step process for every kanji you come across. This is the bare minimum, the bare essential to learning kanji. For someone with a Chinese background, step 3, that is to say, associating a kanji with the meaning, becomes their version of step 1, and it's something they have been actively and subconsciously doing their entire life. If the kanji in question happens to use onyomi reading, or a reading they're already familiar with, then step 2 of associating a kanji with its pronunciation becomes easier for them as well. The only step they truly need to focus on, then, is associating the reading with its meaning. Now, throughout the entire video, I have been doing my best to describe things as they are and as how I've experienced them. I try to be as objective and descriptive as possible and express things neutrally. But here is where I give my subjective opinion. Not having a Chinese knowledge should not bar you from learning Japanese. I want to emphasize 3 things as a concluding remark. 1. When you first decided you wanted to study Japanese, you did it because you wanted to learn a language. You didn't do it because you wanted to compete with someone who already practically knew half the language. It's your own journey, make it yours. Number 2, I have a lot of respect for Japanese learners out there who can carry themselves without needing to rely on Chinese knowledge. This puts you in a position where you have to put in twice the amount of effort, things are more difficult for you. You have to learn kanji from scratch. That's a big undertaking, and that's very, very respectable and commendable. Number 3, we all start somewhere. People with Chinese knowledge just happen to have started their Japanese learning journey early and without actually realizing it. 10 years down the road, if you decide you want to learn Chinese, just remember, hey, you already know Japanese. You already have a Japanese knowledge advantage.